അവിടുന്ന് മണ്ണിറ മണത്തിൽ
Hey everyone, it's Sam, and welcome back to the 911 Nonsense podcast. To stay in the loop, learn about upcoming guests, and join in the conversations with the Noon community, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And hey, if you like what you hear in this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support means the world to us. Jimmy Apple, better known as the EMS Avenger, shares his journey from volunteer EMT to paramedic specializing in pediatric and neonatal critical care. With over 20 years in EMS, Jimmy talks about the highs and lows of his career, the impact of small moments, and how social media became his platform for education and advocacy. We also discuss conflict resolution in EMS, his most memorable calls, and the books that shaped his approach to patient care and leadership. Let's get started. Hey guys, are you looking for a top-notch first aid kit? Look no further than JumpMedic. Owned by a seasoned paramedic with over a decade of EMS experience, their kits are user-friendly and packed with essential supplies. From the most popular Pro Gen 2 to the compact hardshell kit, they've got you covered. You can even customize your own kit with the Build-A-Bag option. Enter the code NOON10, N-O-O-N, the number 10, and enjoy 10% off your order. Free U.S. shipping, and everything is HSA FSA approved. Visit JumpMedic.com and follow at JumpMedicUSA on Instagram. Stay prepared with JumpMedic. Guys, I'm so excited today. We have an amazing guest, and his name is Jimmy, but he's also known as the EMS Avenger. Thanks for joining us on the Noon podcast. How are you doing today, Jimmy?
I'm doing great. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here, man. You're so smart. Let me just tell you, you're so smart. I love your content. I love listening to your stuff. Not only are you smart, but you're not afraid to be confrontational about your sources, which is fantastic. It's hard to find, and that's something that I've kind of chatted a little bit about in previous episodes, and we'll talk about it a little bit more, but let me go ahead and get an introduction.
Sure. So I am Jimmy Apple, otherwise known as the EMS Avenger on social media. I am a 20-year paramedic, most of which has been in 911 with some intermixing of critical care. And then now I do full-time pediatric and neonatal critical care. I started getting into content creation on social media probably maybe around 7 or 8 years ago. I've just always had a love of learning, and I always felt like that if you're passionate about learning, that you should be passionate about sharing and teaching. At least I am passionate about sharing and teaching. I think it couples well with the love of learning. And at one point or another, I wanted to have a podcast, and I talked to Ginger Locke, who's a good friend of mine, who is the host of the Medic Mindset podcast, and she asked me, "What are you going to do that no one else is doing?" And that just shut me down completely because I wasn't going to do anything different. I would have just been another less well produced, less well put together voice out there. And so I just kind of started working social media for a long time and then started kind of finding myself in rooms, figuratively speaking, with other influencers. And then not too long ago, a couple of years ago, my daughter started sending me funny videos through messages that were TikTok videos. I succumbed to the temptation to install the app. And then I was like, you know what? I think that there are an awful lot of EMS providers on this app all day who are not necessarily up with current science and evidence-based medicine. Not, for any I'm not assigning anything to them. It's just maybe it's just not getting to them. And I was like, if I can sneak a little bit of evidence-based medicine at them a couple of times a day on this app, I can make a difference. And here I am.
And here you are. That is true. It's also very true that not a lot of providers are getting exposed to current evidence, right? We talk about evidence-based practice, but when we look at like CEs that we have to do for work, it's usually those ones that are 5 years old that aren't updated, but those are mandatory CEs, right? So
Yeah.
why do they make it so complicated? And I can tell you from firsthand experience, like, I don't pay for apps to do research with. I don't go out of my way. If I'm blocked by an ad, I'm not going to look at it. You have to have either be like with the university, have a library card, right? Or have some other access to online journals if you want access to that. Why do you think they make it so complicated for EMS?
Well, I mean, I don't think they're necessarily trying to make it complicated for EMS. The people who decide what EMS does, they have access to those articles, right?
Sure.
And in as much as in a institution such as a hospital, the people who determine what practices, they have access to that articles. What's happened now, though, is that the people who are on the downflow of how that practice is carried out, the boots on the ground, mid-level and lower level practitioners, the nurses, paramedics, respiratory therapists, anyone that I'm leaving out, are becoming more sophisticated. And rather than being given a pre-packaged algorithm, they actually want to understand pathophysiologically what they're doing, and rightly so, they should. Um, we are in the information age, and it just isn't acceptable now to just follow an algorithm. But our access to that information hasn't caught up. However, we've kind of like socialized, or we're on the forefront of socializing that information, and that started with the FOAM movement on social media, which stands for free open access meducation, or medical education, where there was a real drive to get access to people who get information who didn't have access to it. And that meant sharing stuff that may be behind paywalls, or creating content that you're not asking compensation for. And so the access is there for people who want it, but it's still not necessarily easy for them to get to. It's not necessarily delivered to their front door.
Yeah, no, that's very accurate.
If I want, I mean, I am like you. I don't pay for any access to anything, and I wouldn't. There's things I can access through the organization I work for, but I mean, if I need a full article, I can email any number of people and get it. So,
And do you feel like that's cheating the system a little bit?
no, I mean, it's a built-in function of the system. You are allowed to email the author of any article wherever it's published. They are permitted to send you a free copy of that article. Uh, so that's built into the system.
That's awesome. And that's not something I would have even ever thought about doing is emailing the author. What a great idea. Is EMS something that you've always been interested in?
Not in the least.
Not in the least. So is this like a second or even a third kind of job for you?
Yeah, I didn't know what I wanted to do in high school. In fact, I can remember this is actually a very memorable point in my life, a pivot point that I always think back to, where we were given some sort of survey that asks you all sorts of stuff about your future, what you've been thinking of, what you'd be suited for, and all this sort of stuff. And I had no idea what to do with this survey. I think it was around 12 or 13. And I was like, am I supposed to be thinking about this? Am I supposed to know this now? And I can remember feeling a great heaviness after that I had absolutely no clue. And that carried that with me throughout a large portion of my life. I wish now I could look back and tell that person, that you're not trapped, and that drive can come at any point in time. But uh, I joined the Navy even before I graduated from high school, kind of floundered around in the Navy, got out, and then I just kind of backed into a job as an electrician's apprentice. And I was really good at it. I understood it. It came to me immediately, and it was a really good and honorable trade. And I did electrical work for about 15 years. But uh, my, I wasn't really, I didn't want to finish out there. And something that really kind of pushed me to get out of it and into something else was my grandfather was dying of cancer. And the last week that he was alive, I talked a lot with him about his life. And I asked him, "Do you have any regrets?" And he said, "I don't really have any regrets, but I do wish I had finished out going to school to become an agricultural veterinarian. He had to go fight in World War II. When he got out, he had to hit the ground running and provide for his family. So he started working for his father's plumbing company. Eventually, he took over that plumbing company and then retired. And that really did something to me. I was like, I don't want on my deathbed to look back and think my whole life I didn't do the thing that I wanted to do. And it kind of unstuck me from reality. Like I started to feel superimposed into my life. And I was like, I need to do something that's meaningful, something that contributes to society, something that's positive, that helps our community, something that will help me feel like I'm doing something. And so I was like, you know what I'll do? I'll take an EMT class. I'll volunteer. That will help me kind of feel like I'm doing something positive until I figure this out. But the very first day that we got into pathophysiology, I was like, oh my goodness, I get this. And I see this like Neo sees code in the Matrix. This is for me. And I didn't look back.
That's amazing, dude. What a cool story, too. And like, what a great opportunity that you got to be able to talk with your grandfather right before he passed away. Like, and to get that insight, right? To get that amazing insight that actually prompted you to move on and do something different. Let's
Yeah.
be honest. Were you a little disappointed with the paycheck, your very first EMT paycheck?
Well, yes and no. So I understood that I would not be able to afford to work as an EMT. So I didn't. I went zero to hero.
Okay.
I took my basic course. I took my intermediate course, which was North Carolina. They do intermediate 99, or they did at the time. So you could intubate, you could push a lot of ALS medications, you could manually defibrillate, that sort of thing. And then I went straight to paramedic school. Not everyone can do that. I'm not bragging, I'm not boasting, but I had the drive to do that. And I got the affirmation from other people that I was getting it at that speed. But I put in the work. There was a rescue squad in our county where you could volunteer for that rescue squad. You know, you would do football games and stuff like that. But if you wanted to, they would put you as a third person on the county EMS units as a volunteer, but you could get experience in 911 doing that. So I did that for 2 weekends a month for a couple of years. And so by the time I got my paramedic license, I had a considerable amount of experience, you know, and you start to work with people regularly, you gain their trust and kind of, you know, what happens in the truck stays in the truck. And so uh, I was relatively seasoned by the time I became a paramedic. And at the time I became a paramedic, that was when I could afford to work. And so it was disappointing that that was the money that you were making, but at the least it was a lateral move at that point.
Yeah, it's a huge step being able to go from basic all the way up to paramedic. And it takes time. I can't speak for your program, but at my time when I was becoming an EMT basic was a semester, intermediate was a semester, and then paramedic was 2 semesters, I think, or a year. So you could get all of it all the way up to paramedic in 4 years, or I'm sorry, in 2 years.
Yeah.
And you just don't see that anymore unless you're going through a certificate program.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had a stellar program, and it was a Cape Fear Community College in Wilmington, North Carolina, and I think they did a great job in producing good medics, and it existed within a system. New Hanover County EMS was a magnet hospital, and they were a high-performing EMS service, and they were expected to know what they needed to know. They had very high standards for their employees, and that's who you worked side by side with until you graduated from paramedic school. That's where you did your clinicals. Their people were your instructors, and so I think I got a pretty good education and clinical experience.
Yeah, and it sounds like you did. And I don't think that when I went through my program, it was a very good program. I think they were just kind of pushing. But I would say now that it is a lot better of a program. In fact, the programs in New Mexico have significantly increased in the last few years. I know that you said that you really understood pathophysiology really well when you first started, but was there ever any times where you felt like it was just hard becoming an EMT or being an EMT?
Um, it was hard. I mean, I worked hard. that's how you overcome difficulty is that you have to meet it with the same amount of perseverance that's being exerted against you, right? So things are only hard if you're not meeting that resistance equally. And I did. And my family sacrificed time with me, but I studied and studied and studied and studied. If I had a spare minute, I opened a book. On my clinicals, I took advantage of my downtime and I studied. I called people, I asked questions. Um, I showed up early for class. There just wasn't a moment that I wasn't working at it. And so it may seem to people who knew me at the time, who gave me the nickname Dr. Apple because I seemed to be skating through the class. But what they didn't see was me giving up everything in my life for 2 years.
I agree with that. It's easy to see how successful people can be or are and then think, well, they had it easy, but don't actually know what it took to get there. And
Yeah, I
you,
mean, everything is hard,
yes,
that's worth working for. And it won't seem hard if you're putting in the effort
exactly. And you said that you were originally in North Carolina, right? And then you
yeah,
moved to Atlanta, is that correct?
to the Atlanta area. Yeah.
And how was that transition for you?
As far as transitioning from one EMS system to another, it was difficult. First of all, where I worked for 5 years was in Brunswick County, North Carolina, a very rural area. And I loved the system that I worked for, and I loved the people there, and I still miss them. But the way that system functioned was you had volunteer rescue squads and volunteer fire departments there. There was only two cities in the county that actually had like established fire departments. Everything else was on a volunteer basis in specific fire districts. And so you had volunteers showing up in their personal vehicles to offer assistance as first responders. They could act on an EMR level. And so there was, you would go in there, they would give you a quick report, but essentially at that point you were in charge. And they kind of just, you know, were there to help you do whatever you needed to do. Coming to the Atlanta area where they had huge fire departments that were established and sometimes even reputable and known in other areas of the country, for their professionalism. And showing up there and speaking to a paramedic who may have 3 times the experience that I can and who is allowed to operate as a paramedic, I had a huge learning curve to get over. I kind of just walked in there and it's like, hey, how you doing? I got this. Thanks. Bye. And I was very disliked initially. And not only that, but I was dealing with the divorce at the same time. And so I basically had this resting bitch face pall over me with that. I wasn't very personable at the time. It was very difficult. I became aware of how I was doing and shifted gears and eventually, righted my reputation there. Made a lot of good friends in this area and, salvaged my reputation. But it was hard initially. Not only that, but North Carolina is a very progressive EMS state, and they have statewide protocols, and there's almost nothing that you can't do where you would have to call medical direction. Georgia is very fragmented. Every county, every locality has a different protocol. And what you're permitted to do by the state is not very progressive. A paramedic can't push paralytics here. They don't have surgical airways. You can only do like needle cricothyrotomy. So it was difficult to be throttled as far as what you're allowed to do. Being now in pediatric and neonatal critical care, it's kind of like the world is my oyster at this point. But it was a tough transition, both personally and professionally.
That does sound like a tough transition. And, one of the things that I've said also previously is that even during some of our worst times, like people think that we might just be upset because of the work that we do, but then also forget to think that we're people and we have lives and we have a lot of stuff going on in the background of our lives. So if we're upset or if we're sad, it's not just because of the things that we've seen. Not to say that it isn't because it could also be just the things that we've seen or that we've done. But a huge part of that comes from where we are in our current lives. And the fact that you had the emotional intelligence to stop and say, hey, these guys aren't liking me, and this is why, and this is how I can fix it is phenomenal because I think it's easy for people to get caught up and be like, oh, well, they don't like me. They're just a bunch of dicks, or they're just assholes. And that's just how it is. That's how the system is, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was actually called into the office at my employer, and I was certain that I was going to be let go because they were questioning me about how I was getting along with the fire departments. And there was a lot of managers in there. And it's the type of meeting where you just like, this is where I'm going to be let go. But I let them know that I was aware of kind of how I got off track and was going to fix it, and I did.
It's fantastic that you were able to do that and to move forward and to be where you are right now. What would you say has been like one of your proudest moments so far in your career?
So the CARES Awards, I don't know if that's a national thing or not, but here in Georgia, the CARES Awards is where you go to receive honors because you had a successful resuscitation and cardiac arrest. And I can remember kind of scanning the room and seeing how many people were in that room. Like there were hundreds and hundreds of people in that room, all who had contributed to somebody walking out of a hospital after their heart had stopped. And I was like, look at the impact that we've had here. Look at how many people we've brought back to their families who, were scared that this was it. It's absolutely amazing. And that was really, really overwhelming for me. It was a really affirming moment in time. But my proudest moments are very small. Like I'm sure that a lot of people look to their saves and all that sort of stuff. Some of my proudest moments are just doing small acts of kindness that people didn't expect. I can remember attending to someone who had turned a golf cart over, and it was a bride and a bridesmaid on the way to the ceremony on a golf course. And the bridesmaid was all bloody, and she wasn't injured. She didn't need to get transported, but she had gotten blood on her shoes. And so I sat down with our bleach wipes and I, for about 20 minutes, worked on those shoes and got them to kind of an acceptable presentation to where they wouldn't be obvious. And I just think those little moments are just some of the best moments.
That's so sweet that you did that. And it's really cool that you enlightened it that way. I agree that some of my proudest moments are in some of the small acts of kindness that we can perform, like getting somebody a prescription for a glucometer because their last glucometer broke and they don't want to take a visit to the ER. Like, how hard was that? It took me 45 minutes to an hour to get a hold of a doctor to get that for them. And that
Yeah,
I've talked about it before. That is one of my proudest moments because I was able to do something and actually make a difference. We do save lives and we do help people, but that is our job. And when we get to do little extra things, that makes it more meaningful.
absolutely. Medicine, first and foremost, is holistic. That's where medicine starts, is caring about the person. And you have to establish that sort of care and regard for who they are and for their humanity. And if you start there and that's your foundation and you refuse to move from that foundation, you're going to have 6 moments a day that are rewarding. I truly believe that. If you try to lose sight of that, you're going to have 6 moments a day that just contribute to burnout. But I just think you have to start from that place of reward, and then you will continue to get rewards from that well. I can remember one of the most profound calls I've ever been on. Myself and a partner who I was with for several years, one of my favorite partners, we responded to a nursing home for an elderly woman who was clearly dying in respiratory failure and cardiac failure. Her daughter said she had a DNR. We asked her what she wanted to do. She wanted to respect the DNR. And so rather than just being like, okay, well, bye, we said, you know what we'll do? I'll put her on this cardiac monitor. We'll keep an eye on her heart rhythm and we'll just kind of walk you through this. And so for the next hour, we watched as she went from, heart rate of around 60 into a sinus brady of around 40 to 30 to 20 to ventricular escape rhythm to eventually asystole. And she was so grateful. The daughter was so grateful for having an experience where instead of being left to her own devices and her mother being left to just kind of pass on in the most base manner possible, that two professionals showed up and with loving care kind of stewarded her out of this mortal coil. And the mother wrote the daughter wrote the most beautiful letter to our service, in appreciation of that. And I just think that I would pay to have those moments, and I got paid to have that moment.
What a great way to put it. Holy smokes, dude. That is an amazing, amazing story. And it really reminds me of a book that you suggested that people read, and that was Crucial Conversations. And one of the biggest I love that book, by the way. Thank you for suggesting that.
Well,
Uh,
you can thank Ginger Locke. She turned me on to that book.
awesome. Yeah, what a great book. I'll actually be speaking with Ginger next week.
Excellent. Tell her that I said hi.
I will. Yeah, so it reminds me of that book, Crucial Conversations, and one of the biggest points that he says is start with heart. I don't know if you remember that, but he always
Yes.
says take a second to step back and start with heart. Start this conversation with heart. Start with whatever you're doing. Start with heart, right? Think about the emotions, think about how you're feeling about it, and start with heart. And that is what that just reminded me of. And that is an amazing story. I love, love, love when people are showing these acts of kindness to our patients because it is really easy to get burned out. It is really easy to go on that 15th call and be an asshole to the patient who fell or to our chronic E2Hers or to whoever, you know what I mean? The toe stub, whatever. And I won't lie, like I was that burnt out paramedic for a while. I was that person, and it did take me getting out of that position and recognizing that I was that kind of an asshole to become a better provider and to be the provider that I am today.
Yeah. We all can get to that place, where the repetition begins that process of burnout. I don't think that anyone who's struggling right now with burnout and toxicity and any sort of kind of negatively spiraling process, I don't think they should look at someone who's thriving as someone who has always thrived, who has sunshine wedged in between their butt cheeks and always has, and is simply kind of a no fail buttercup of positivity, It's someone who simply has won the fight or is at least fighting the good fight. And there's very little that separates me from someone who's struggling with burnout. It's not a wide chasm. It is a hair of difference in between there. It's just simply which one you're choosing every single day. On the subject of crucial conversations, my biggest takeaway from that book was in having those crucial and difficult conversations with other people is to keep in mind that you are not the hero of this story and they are not the villain. Um, you are two people who have a disagreement who are standing on equal footing. And in that regard, it makes it much easier to resolve conversations.
Yeah, that's a great takeaway. I recommend everybody read that one. It had great key points and it makes you do a lot of reflection. I think that more people need more reflection. Do you feel comfortable sharing maybe one of your worst events or worst calls that you've ever responded on?
I mean, the worst calls that I've ever had. I mean, I've had the gory calls. you know, that are traumatic, pediatric arrests, the wrecks that end up being very hard to look at. But those aren't the things that I remember on a daily basis. Uh, well, okay, so I'm going to tell you who my ghost is. I think that everyone has a ghost, at least one of them. And I don't know the name of my ghost, and I think I kind of give her a different name at various times when I'm thinking about her. But I was about a year into my career, and we responded to a wreck on some outlying road. It was a head-on. No one was wearing their seatbelt, and there was a fatality. And so we dealt first with the person who was in the other vehicle. He had to be flown out, and it took an awful lot to extricate him and then get flown out. Because we were a county service, we also did the recovery of people who didn't survive, and we would bring them to the morgue. And so we had to get this vehicle righted back up because it was on its side. It had crushed the driver. And here was this beautiful 19-year-old woman, had engagement ring on, no actual like gross trauma that was visible. I mean, you could tell by looking at her that she was not alive, but we had to put her in a body bag, and transport her. And I even we got her on the ground, and there was like even some foam, a little bit of foam coming out of her mouth because just the pressure change in the environment. It was very humid outside, and we got her into the back of an air conditioned ambulance, in a body bag, but she was still kind of exposed because we were putting some stuff together and weren't ready to quite zip up yet. So the change in the environment caused, a little bit of fluid shift, and there was a little bit of foam coming out of her mouth. And I I couldn't stop myself from wondering, is she actually dead? Has anybody put her on a cardiac monitor? And I talked to the first responding medic who got there, and she was like, yes, she was in asystole. Obviously, the mechanism of injury was simply too much. But I just couldn't stop. Is she really gone? Is she really gone? Is she really gone? She looks incredibly peaceful. She looks like she's just sleeping. And uh, it really, really, really bothered me. And what also bothered me was that a state trooper that day was going to go to a guy's house who was just waiting her to come home from work and give her some incredibly bad news. And that person's life was going to change forever. But I even after the end of the day, it was like, what if I just checked? What if I just put her on the cardiac monitor? What if there's a couple things we could have done? And from then on, anytime I've had a patient that we simply have exhausted all possibilities, had to stop or, make a decision that we weren't going to start, she's right there saying, how many people are you going to just let go? You didn't help me, and now you didn't help this person. I don't remember her name, so sometimes she's Susan, sometimes, she's Christina, it's just various names, but she is always with me. And uh, I guess that's probably my worst experience because it is the most lasting one.
I'm really sorry that you went through that. And I'm very proud of you for being able to talk about it. And I hope you don't feel that like I'm pushing you in any way, because if you do want to stop talking about it, we can stop talking about it. But I would like to ask a couple of questions if that's okay.
Sure, but let me just say that I don't have any problem talking about it. I think that we should be talking about these things, not in the environment when, some toxic dude bro walks up off the street and says, "What's the worst thing you've ever seen?"
Yes.
But, in this environment, I'm happy to do that, and I certainly wouldn't talk about something I didn't want to talk about.
I really appreciate you
Yeah.
clarifying that. And I appreciate you opening up and talking about it. Do you think that you would feel different if you had obtained that EKG?
I think at the time it would have alleviated some concerns. It was hard to trust someone else as far as yes, we did do this, and yes, she is dead. You know, traumatic arrest with asystole, not a good combination. You know, there's almost no coming back from that. But maybe having that experience, I think one lesson I took out of that is that you have to do some things that are going to help you sleep at night. So if you're in that position and someone says, "Trust me," I think it's okay to take ownership over that moment and say, "You know what? I do trust you, but there's something psychological for me here that I just need, which is to see that asystole in three leads." And I've had traumatic arrest since then, where you look at the person and say, "This is unsurvivable. There is no point to putting them on the cardiac monitor." But for two reasons, I'm going to do this. Number one, because whatever compulsiveness is happening within me is not going to be resolved or will be much easily resolved if I do this. But number two, I'm always going to remember this county in North Carolina when I worked there, where two medics called it on someone, and then the coroner called the EMS service and said, "Hey, come get this guy because he's breathing."
That's really that's really funny. But did you see there are recent studies that are showing like not just babies, but even sometimes adults can have spontaneous return after like 20 minutes of,
Well, yeah,
of
I mean,
downtime?
yeah, I mean, there's it's an effect called Lazarus syndrome,
Yes.
um, and it's not. I don't think it's as common as people would say. I mean, we
No.
generally know them by their cases, but yeah, it definitely does happen. But in this instance, they did not put the person on the cardiac monitor, so it
That's
wasn't a
insane.
case. It wasn't a case of some, and I think that he actually had some respiratory effort. So it wasn't a case of someone who from a cardiac standpoint had no activity. They just didn't do their job.
Yeah. No, I definitely can understand that. And what do you think you would do if you were on a scene and you had called a similar cardiac arrest and another EMT or paramedic, say fire, came on and said, "Well, I would now like to put this person on a three lead."
It's really easy to say, this is what I would do. This is what I want to do. What I want to do is say, absolutely, let's do that. So I have a philosophy, which is do not talk yourself out of a good idea and do not talk other people out of good ideas. So if someone in this situation, you know, the gravity of the situation is somebody's life. If somebody wants to put them on the cardiac monitor, that's fine. Now, if they put them on the cardiac monitor and there's no signs of life, and then they're like, "I still want to work them," well, we have to have a discussion at that point about whether or not they're a good candidate for resuscitation or not.
Yeah, no, great response. Also, I wouldn't be opposed to letting somebody, I don't think, come in as a secondary and say, "Well, we just," I mean, we know it wouldn't be like, "I am having a psychological issue with this," right? They wouldn't say that. They would say, "Well, I need proof," or
Yeah,
I need to see." And for the
yeah.
most part, I wouldn't see an issue with that as
Here's the other
long
way
as
I
the
would look
family
at
was
it.
okay with it. Yeah.
Here's the other way I would look at it. Do you want to be the only person in the courtroom talking about it or one of 50?
Yes. Have you ever had to go to court?
I did a preliminary hearing at one point, and it went fine.
Oh, that's good.
I wasn't in trouble. I was there as a witness.
Yeah, it's a very intimidating feeling knowing that people are questioning your medicine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I haven't been in the position where somebody was questioning my actions directly, so I don't know what that would be like.
Yeah, it was my case was for a shaken baby, and that kid is now permanently damaged,
Hmm,
which is unfortunate, but they literally they deliberated on this case for less than 2 hours and they let him off.
that's terrible.
It is terrible. It
Yeah,
is ridiculous that that this is the state of our country right now.
yeah. I wanted to revisit something that I was thinking about when you asked me, like, what's the worst stuff?
Sure.
Um, the things that stick with me the most are just when someone was like incredibly mean.
Really?
Those are the things that I remember, you know?
That's an interesting perspective. Why do you think you felt that way?
I think because it's so disruptive. Uh, there's one incident where it was about 5 or 6 years ago. Um, Responded to a wreck. There were several vehicles involved. There was like 6 or 7 patients. We were the only unit on scene. I have a lot of plates spinning, at this point, trying to keep track of a lot. And I talked to a mother who had an infant in a car seat in the back who was wondering whether or not her child should be seen. And I said, I'm not going to tell you that because what I really want to do is respect what you want to do as a mother. I don't think that we should be talking parents out of their best instincts for their child because it puts them in the same predicament that I was in with that patient that I was talking about who was killed in the wreck, which is what if?
Yes.
But I said, here's the thing. Kids are not stoic. They don't hide when something is wrong. They let you know when something is injured. It's not usually a mystery. Also, if they're not presenting with any obvious injuries, they're not reporting any obvious injuries, they're not going to undergo any scans or anything like that. They're just going to be observed for a little while. So it's really up to you. And she was like, you know what? That's all I needed. That's fine. Well, while I'm triaging some other people, the grandmother showed up and then got right in my space and started screaming at me about why I wasn't transporting this kid. And suddenly here I am on the defensive about, well, I talked to the mother and I don't even, who are you?
Yeah.
And it I was put on my back feet very quickly, and she started talking very poorly about me to everyone else on scene about our service and about how if this other service had showed up, everything would have been better. I don't know what it is, but I carry that sort of stuff around with me. When somebody suddenly uh, inserts themselves unnecessarily into a process, and becomes like a fly in the ointment. I don't know. That was really disruptive to me.
How does it make you feel though when they're approaching you that way?
Um, a little bit out of control because you have no way to give them a glimpse into how earnest you are, and sincere you are about doing a good job. And she's one who kind of fails that crucial conversations test where I am now the villain in her story and she is the hero who's come in and rescued her grandchild and thinks that it is an act of prestige to have her grandchild transported to the hospital. Essentially, what we are doing is bending the knee to her value system by transporting rather than actually providing a needed service. But it made me feel incredibly out of control and, having your professionalism doubted to me. I guess that's the thing right there is that I do have a lot of pride in what I do and how I do it. And so having somebody question that is, you know, tough.
Yeah, so that was going to be my next question is it your pride that you're worried about, and like do you feel insecure about your medicine or do you feel pretty solid about your medicine?
No, I do not feel insecure about my medicine. I think that I don't want to portray a false humility here. Um, I think that I'm a capable provider. And I think that my body of work demonstrates that. I think other people would attest to that. And I just think that it's reasonable to say that I'm a
Yes.
capable provider. But you go through a process of learning how to value humility in certain situations. And there is a startling lack of conflict resolution training in EMS.
Yes.
Something I learned after that was in a counseling session that I had that was personal and kind of sussing out how to get through a difficult situation with someone who is as intensely invested in that moment as you are. And something I realized after that, I had to kind of like I started writing it down and journaling and even made some videos kind of like vocalizing that, which is that the 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 most powerful thing you have at your disposal in a moment like that is the words, I'm sorry. And it's not an admission of guilt, right? What it is an act of diplomacy, you know? And I didn't realize, and I don't think a lot of people realize, how much you can diffuse a situation by just taking over that burden and just saying, you know what, can we have a timeout here? I just wanted to personally apologize because I had my head in seven different directions and I was cognitively overloaded and I did not mean to react to you so defensively. And what I really want is just to make sure that everyone gets taken care of here. So can we start over? Could you imagine how that moment would have reversed itself if I had done that? I mean, I would have just let all the air out of the balloon.
Yeah,
So I've taken that lesson with me, into more recent, conflicts that I've had with people.
sure. No, and that's a great way of putting it. And I agree 100%. Like, we are in a customer service, right? But we aren't taught for conflict resolution. So, what do a lot of us do? We just give in to what is going on in the moment, right? So, like, one call that I had very specifically, we were picking up a young lady, and it was her and her wife or her girlfriend. I'm not sure. Clearly, like, an abusive situation. They were on the side of the road. I don't think that they wanted to be out anymore. So the spouse called for something like abdominal pain. Or maybe she was trying to get away from the situation. I don't know what it was. The spouse was so in our face and would not get out of our face. Like we told her, you cannot ride in the back. The hospital is less than a mile that way. Like you can walk. It's a nice day. We're just trying to separate the situation. We couldn't get PD there. PD was too busy. Fire wasn't there. It was just us. And finally, after like 20 minutes of arguing with this lady, like it's a fine balance, right? How much danger am I in right now? Is this lady about to pull out a knife or a weapon that I'm not aware of? So I told her, I was like, just get in the truck. You can sit in the front. You're going to sit with me. And then you have to go wait in the waiting area while we
Hmm.
get her triaged and everything. Like, just stop arguing. Shut up, get in the truck. You know what I mean? Like that,
Yeah,
it was after 20, 30 minutes, it finally got to that point. But what else could I have done with no other resources at the time? What options did I have? I wasn't a big person. My partner wasn't a big person. We're really close to the hospital. Do what we can.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And how do we get people to practice that? You know, Conflict resolution is something that you have to practice consistently.
I think that all public safety and all medical personnel should get a mandatory 4 hours per year of conflict resolution training. It is going to, by far, be the most powerful tool that you have in your toolbox because what is it that we always talk about constantly about our interactions with patients who potentially we will have conflicts with because we lead with conflict. Oh, this call is bullshit. Oh, we're going to this call and it's bullshit. Oh my God, it's this patient. We are, uh, it is a jack in the box that we are just like cranking that is going to open at any time, even before we get to the call. And so I think that we have to have mandatory conflict resolution training and conflict prevention training.
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea for training. Speaking of training, how do you come up with your ideas for content creation? Like, how do you decide what you're going to post about?
I just post about the things that I'm interested in. So,
That's
uh,
fantastic.
yeah. I mean, so a couple of days ago, a friend of mine in Colorado messaged me and says, I want to hear you talk about this thing. And it was stellate ganglion block, which is when you nerve block the stellate ganglion in your neck so you can stop sympathetic stimulation to the heart to stop refractory ventricular defibrillation. It's something I actually had on a list of things to talk about because there was a study that came out very recently that talked about it. I didn't really have my way into it, so it was just kind of lingering there in the list. But since she asked, I was like, okay, challenge accepted. I made a video about it. I posted it today, this morning. It's actually one of my most favorite videos that I've ever edited, but it's so nerdy that it's not going to get a lot of play, but I don't really care. I consider these videos where I put that effort into it to be like seeds that I plant
Yes.
that are investments in the future as far as my skills and that sort of thing goes. But so a lot of people ask for stuff. Um, Sometimes something new will happen that is worth mentioning, like the paramedic 3 trial came out a couple months ago, which demonstrated that IVIO access was equal to no, excuse me, that IO access was equal to IV access as far as outcomes in cardiac arrest, which kind of resolves the question, should IO only be a secondary consideration, right? But it was a big study. We were all waiting for it to come out. And so when it did, of course, I'm going to talk about that. It's relevant to everyone that's out there. Sometimes I'll see some content that I'm like, ooh, that's not evidence based, you know? And so I'll create some sort of response to that. I'll just be sitting there, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, you know what? Um, this would be a good topic because I'm like on a call, I think of something that we did. I'm like, oh, I should make a video about this. So, I mean, there's no shortage of content or ideas. And some of it is just stuff that you talk about over and over and over to people, like myths that come up, like the myth that you can't give nitro in an inferior MI, the myth of the hypoxic drive, all sorts of stuff like that. So I will say that you do reach a point where some days I'm like, well, I guess that's it. I'm done. I've talked about everything. And I'm like, I think what I'll do is I'll take a little bit of break. And then the next day, I'm like, oh, crap. I want to talk about this. So
That's so funny. And that's that's a great way of doing it too. You had mentioned in your form that you are an introvert.
very much so.
I find that hard to believe.
So here's the thing about introverts. Introverts, at least my type of introvert, and I think that maybe some people would call what I am as an uh, extroverted introvert,
Mm-hmm.
maybe. But introverts, it's not that they don't want to talk to people, and it's not that they don't want to have friends. It's that they are very intimidated by the process of getting there. And I don't like small talk, uh, and I'm not good at accommodating small talk. And I'm not interested in talking about college basketball or just I'm not interested in talking about things that I'm not interested in. And so it's very hard for an introvert to get a good friend because an introvert really wants to talk about more important things, things that are at least important to them.
Yes.
And the single best thing that has ever happened to introverts is social media because it has allowed them the framework to say all the things that they have ever wanted to say
Yes, it
without
has.
going through the hassle of going out to a party.
Yes. It does allow people to do a little more than they were doing before. That's awesome. I have one more question for you.
Okay.
Are you proud of yourself?
Yes. Um, and I'm going to tell you why is because it took a lot for me to get here. Uh, I did not have a good upbringing. I grew up in a very abusive family where there was abuse, neglect, and abandonment. I grew up in an impoverished area. I was at risk every time I left my house. And I subsequently developed a pretty incredible inferiority complex, which leads to a lot of bullying in school. And I also feel like that all those things, contribute to the possibility of psychological diagnoses. And I feel like that I have lived my whole life like holding this wall that all these diagnoses are on the other side of, just holding it up and keeping it from collapsing. And I've worked very hard to get past that and to be and remain functional. I think just surviving at this point is something to be proud of. But I have come from someone who I can remember being the age of 14 and asking my dad something where there was a conflict between myself and my stepmother. And he said, well, I have to think about her first because she's my first priority. And what I realized at that moment was, you know what? I am no one's first priority. And I had an incredible amount of darkness in my life. And defeating that and actually getting to a point where I'm achieving a certain amount of success that I created for myself, I think is something to be incredibly proud of.
That is something to be very incredibly proud of, Jimmy, and I am so proud of you. I am
Thank you.
so proud of where you came from, who you are today, where you're at today. You did all of that. I was so pumped for you the other day when you posted about your little tabletop gaming thing that you have on your desk right now because
Yeah.
you wanted it so bad and you finally went out and did it and purchased it for yourself. And that is phenomenal. That is amazing, dude. Fantastic. I'm so proud of you, dude. And
Thank you.
I just want to give you a couple of minutes to talk about anything else that you feel that we didn't talk about during this episode, or anything if you want to shout yourself out.
Well, first of all, I just, that moment was a great moment to, I mean, I hadn't considered at all whether or not I was proud of myself. And I don't think about, I, I know that there is a perception out there from people that I'm arrogant, opinionated, and confrontational. I will say about the confrontational thing that I think some people mistake confrontational for invested. And I know that I have a lane that I exist in that is attractive to a certain amount of people. But I want to assure people that in this lane I have of success, that I do not think about myself. When I wake up in the morning, one I'm thinking about what can is there a way that I can say something inspiring today? I feel like today is not a day for talking about a study. I want to say something that just is meaningful, and talk about something, that it helps us as providers think about things a different way. But I'm not thinking about virtue signaling or, doing something that shows people that I'm a good person. I do not think about myself when it comes to this stuff. I'm really trying to do good work. And so to have a moment where you're like, think about yourself for a minute, that is the first time that I've really, really thought about where I came from and where I am now. And I could feel myself getting emotional as I was saying it. So
I saw
that
you.
that that was a good moment.
I see you, brother. I see you.
I guess I don't know, as far as like talking about what's going on. I feel like that I am on the cusp now of moving. I'm not on the cusp. Gwynny shames me constantly for not recognizing that I am not just a guy who's holding a camera in front of my face and having some TikTok interaction. I am a brand, and I'm doing good work out there, and I need to start thinking myself as that and as a business and that sort of stuff, and that's fine. It's hard for me to accept that, but I am working on things to bring more of what people like into where they can get actually credit for learning the things that I'm teaching, get credit for learning it from me. But I guess really the only thing that I would want to say, because I don't want to sit here and talk about myself more than you are accommodating.
Yeah.
Uh, but I just want to say that I am incredibly grateful for the people out there who do recognize the work that I'm doing and who give me support and who send me messages that are supportive of that and thanking me for what I'm doing and thanking them for helping them pass this or learning about this, or coming up to me and giving me a challenge coin, from their service or something like that. I get a lot of messages. And I maintain my presence across multiple platforms. I have the TikTok channel, the EMS Avenger TikTok channel. My following is growing on Instagram. I have a Facebook page. I cross post to Threads and Blue Sky and LinkedIn. And so my inbox is pretty full when I wake up in the morning. And I am filled with gratitude at the support. And I just want to thank people because that's meaningful to me, to have those connections to people who say, "Hey, you did something that was meaningful to me," and to let me know that. That's incredibly meaningful to me. And I really appreciate the people out there who appreciate that content.
That's amazing, dude. And for anybody out there who thinks that they can judge somebody based off of one video or base somebody's character off of like one social media contact, like you're a douche, seriously. Just sit down and get to know somebody before you're making comments or talking shit about somebody. We're all in this profession together. Let's build it up, please.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Please. Yep.
I just also wanted to say the people that do contact me, I am on the losing side now of being able to keep up with it all. Like I'll spend an hour a day responding to DMs. I can't get to all of them at this point. I just can't. It's impossible. And what I want to tell some people who are messaging me in earnest, um, lead off with exactly what you want to talk about because some people will just message me with, "Hey." I'm not even going to open the message at this point. I don't have time for "hey." Um, and I am not going to give out my personal phone number and talk to you on the phone. But outside of that, I try to engage with everybody who messages me.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, strong work, dude. And then where can we find you at?
So I am EMS Avenger across all social media platforms.
Perfect. You got lucky. You picked a good name, dude.
Yeah, thank you.
That's awesome. Well, Jimmy, if you don't have anything else, then I think we are at the end of our day. You have anything
Okay.
else to say? You good? You feel good about it?
I do just encourage everyone. This is what I'll end with. I get a lot of people who come up and ask me, "How do I save more lives?" And I think what they're asking is, "How can I improve my resuscitation game?" And I have a million ideas on how you can improve your resuscitation game. But how you can save more lives is by valuing every single life that presents themselves to you who is asking for your help. Because when you have value for their life, you affirm their life. And when you affirm someone's life, in some cases, you will save their lives. And that's how you save more lives.
Jimmy, you're amazing. That's great advice, dude. And I really hope you have a great rest of your day, brother.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Bye. Thanks for tuning in. If you're enjoying the show and want to show your support, be sure to check out the Noon merch store on Bonfire. Find the link in the description below. Also, if you have any guest suggestions or if you're interested in being a guest on Noon yourself, visit the website at www.samspursuit.com to get in touch.